office setup has been hard work. Which reminds me, I absolutely hate the way our society over-glorifies hard work. So today, we're going to talk about it. The early bird gets the worm, rise and grind, and of course, the biggest lie of them all, hard work pays off. How often have you heard those expressions throughout your life? And here's my internal conflict. I consider myself to be a very hard worker, and I live my life as if hard work pays off. But it doesn't. Or at least hard work is only half the story. Before we go any further though, I should let you know that a portion of this video is sponsored by Cabot. If you haven't already heard about Cabot, they make a broad range of extremely high quality exterior wood care products. I've been working with Cabot products for years to protect and to beautify exterior woods, and I've always been super impressed with the quality of their products, and that's why I thought they would be the perfect partner for this build. But we'll talk about that more once we get to the actual finishing. By the way, what do you guys think of the new office setup? I took the desk and pushed it against the window over there, and then I bought a couch which will hopefully absorb some sound waves and help with reverb when I'm doing voiceover recording. Still definitely a work in progress. I had a dual monitor set up, but I'm gonna replace it with a single big screen, and then I have the herringbone table down here because I'm torture testing the one I treated with Odie's oil out in the living room. Anyways, back to the conversation at hand. Telling somebody that hard work pays off is at best a half truth because it leaves out the most important part of the equation, and that's working smart. If you aren't working smart, then there's no point in working hard, and also kind of vice versa too. Consider the example of digging a trench for a foundation. You could dig it by hand, which would be hard and take all day, or you could rent an excavator and get the job done quickly and easily. Working smart will almost always trump working hard. I think that's true of life in general, but it's especially true when it comes to building things and making things, which we are going to do today, by the way. We are going to be building some outdoor chairs for my terrace here behind you, which I promised you guys in the last video. So without further ado, let's head over to the shop and get started on this build, and we can keep talking about working smart versus working hard. Today, we are going to be working with hemlock. And if you've never heard of hemlock before, it's a white wood that's not dissimilar from a pine or a cedar, but given that it's not as well known as those two woods, you can actually find it in stock right now. If you're watching this video in 2021, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Lumber prices are insane right now. There's shortages everywhere. And if you're watching this at some point in the future, well, then it's 2021 and lumber prices are absolutely insane right now. So as you can see, I've already actually milled and cut most of these pieces, except for this one, which I saved so that I can cut it on camera. And that's because I wanted to have a good spot to explain why I chose the particular dimensions that I did. I bought all this hemlock as 2x8 stock, and after milling it, I was left with just enough wood that I could rip 3 2¼ inch wide pieces out of each 2x8. This seemed like a good compromise between yield of usable wood and style. Once I was done on the table saw, I took a quick break to figure out my next steps. I just spent a little bit of time figuring out all the angles on the table here behind me, and we are ready to start cutting all these pieces. Don't worry, it's not actually going to look like that. That's just kind of rough approximation so I can figure out all the angles. We're actually going to start cutting all of these pieces behind me here to length using the miter saw, which I think is a great example of working smart versus working hard, because I could definitely cut all of these by hand, but instead I'm going to use this machine, which is much faster, much more accurate, and all around better. I have a huge amount of respect for woodworkers who only use hand tools, but I love power tools and really any tool that can save me time while I'm working. I learned very early on that outside of a few edge cases, the value of something isn't derived from how long it took you to make it, it's derived from the enjoyment that the end user gets while using it. So the faster I can get the job done, the more valuable I make my time. The pieces I'm cutting here will form the seat and the back of the chair. To save time and work as smart as possible, I cut all of my pieces in big batches. I'd set up a stop block, butt my piece to it, and then cut it to length. This made for very easy and accurate repeated cuts. Once I was done with one batch, I'd pause, reset the stop block, and then start the next batch. Okay, so that's it for cutting all the parts we need for the seat and the back of the chair. There's still a little bit of cutting left to do for the armrest, but that's gonna be a little bit more complicated, and honestly, I just kind of want to take a break from cutting for a bit, so let's do a little bit of assembly. While you enjoyed this montage of me assembling the seat, I wanted to talk about why I picked hemlock. Cost and availability were big factors, but it's also supposed to be a very good outdoor wood. Some people say it's more rot resistant than pressure treated, and it gets harder with age. Also, I had just never worked with it before, and I'm always excited to try a new wood. The assembly here is straightforward. I'm just layering wood and alternating between back pieces and seat pieces, and then adding little spacer pucks where necessary. necessary. Each layer is held together with a combination of glue and finishing screws. Finishing screws are a lot less likely to split the wood due to their narrower heads, but still, just to be safe, I was pre-drilling each screw. And we are done. Or at least we're done the first one. It's about 2:30 now, so I'm gonna take a quick lunch break and then I'm gonna get back to work on the second chair. You know what, before I take a lunch break, why don't I do the smart thing and clamp this together? Oh yeah, look, we actually got a little bit of glue squeeze out here. Okay, that's better. Bye for real this time. All right, I feel much better after eating a little something. That definitely went in the garbage can, and nobody can tell me otherwise. Now that we're done the first one, we're gonna get started on the second one. Nothing too exciting here, but like a good shampoo, we are going to rinse and repeat that entire process. Did I mention that I'm building 2 chairs yet? Because I am. I figured that if I was gonna go to all the work of designing and figuring out how to build 1 chair, I may as well get my money's worth and make it a matching set. The second seat went together a lot quicker. By this point, I was basically a seasoned pro. Hold on a second, what is that on my head? I'm just seeing this now for the first time during the edit. It looks like some sort of big wood chip maybe? I don't know, but you know what? Best guess down in the comments will get pins in the top of this video. Let's figure out what this thing is. Just like that, we're done number 2 as well. So now I think before we do anything else, I'm gonna give these a quick sand because it's gonna be really easy to access the flat parts of it. Once I put the arms on, it's gonna be a little trickier. Oh, well, looks like whatever it is still stuck in my head in this scene. Anyways, when it comes to sanding and prepping for finish, I find that it's often a lot easier and faster to sand things prior to final assembly. It just makes it so much easier to reach all those inside corners and tough to get to spots. Once I was done with all the flats, I switched over to this cute little mini sanding block and used it to round off all of those sharp corners. Now that we're done sanding the seat and the back, we can move on to doing the armrests and the, I guess, feet that sit on the floor. This is gonna be pretty tricky, but I'll be honest with you guys, I actually took the time to create a little prototype over here. There's a lot of trial and error involved in making that, so I wanted to save you guys the pain of it, but while we're doing this one, I will still show you the entire process that I used to figure those out. The first thing I did was lay the chair on its side on top of 2 pieces that would be the front and the back of the armrest. And I made sure that they were flush with the existing angles of the chair. Then I figured out the distance from the top of the seat to the ground. So in my case, I found that 16.5 inches was a pretty good distance. So I'll mark that on here. Then it was a matter of figuring out the angle between the floor and the seat back. And this is actually where a lot of the trial and error happened. I had to go through quite a few different iterations until I found something that was comfortable. The main challenge here was finding a balance between being too tippy if the angle was too steep and still being comfortable to sit in. Nobody wants to sit in a chair that's perfectly upright. Eventually I landed on a nice round 10 degrees. This seemed to be a good balance between the two. Once I had that, I could figure out the rest of my measurements. I took a horizontal piece and laid it across my 2 vertical pieces. I set it at a 10-degree angle relative to the backrest, which is right about there, and then lined it up with my little seat height tick at the front. And then from there, I had something that looks like this, which, believe it or not, is enough information to figure out all the lengths and angles that I needed to cut. First thing I did was measure from the outside corners to the outside corners, and then I figured out all the interior miter cuts I would need to make using this miter feeler gauge. This is a super handy tool because all you have to do is push it into a corner and it gives you the exact miter cuts you need to make. So it'll either give you a single cut if you want to just do a flat angle, or a miter there on the interior ring. I think this tool ties very nicely into our theme of working smart and not hard. I use these all the time on job sites to figure out the angle of the trim. It's just a really handy tool and it costs like $5. Just buy it, toss it in your toolkit, and you will be surprised how often you use this. Oh, and to figure out the armrest, I did a very similar thing. I just mocked up some different sized ones, tried them out in position, and then used a very similar method to figure out these angles and these lengths. I then took all that information and combined it into this, which is a cut list for all the different pieces that we're going to need to create 4 armrests for our 2 different chairs. So let's start cutting. Rather than dispassionately listing off all of the various angles and lengths I cut here, which would probably take the better part of 10 minutes, I think this is a great time to let you know that I make 3D SketchUp models of all my builds available over on my Patreon page. 3D models allow you to pull all of the relevant angles and measurements that you might need, and they also give you the freedom to play around with the designs and make them your own. Sufficient to say though, there were a lot of different angles to cut here, but working to that pre-planned cut sheet really helped me to keep it all organized and and manageable. However, at this point in the build, I actually found myself at a bit of a standstill. I would love to start assembling these armrests, but unfortunately we're missing a critical component. So I actually ordered a rotor bit for my rotor table there to assist in joining all of these miters together, but it hasn't come yet. Now there's different ways that I could do this, but I really feel that the router bit is the fastest and easiest way. So given the theme of today's video, I really think that it's best that I wait for it to come in. So I'm gonna do that and then I will pick this video back up. See you then. Good news, everybody. It's a couple days later and my tongue and groove rotor bits finally came in. So let me explain to you guys how these work. This one is the tongue rotor bit. So this will cut a tongue into a piece of wood. And this guy here is the groove bit, which will cut a groove into a piece of wood. Then you can join them together for a really strong miter connection. No doubt a rotor table is a great labor-saving tool, but getting it dialed in was a bit of a process. Cutting these test pieces was partly to show you guys how the bits work, but it was also a great chance for me to figure out what settings I'd need to make everything work right. Nailing the bit height is obviously very important to getting the tongue and the groove to line up, so I'd recommend figuring out the tongue first and then using that as a reference to set up your groove. Now that we've got our groove cut and our tongue cut, these two pieces will mate together very nicely, and with a little bit of glue in there, we will have a very secure miter connection. These test guides are done, and now it's time to move on to the main show and do the same process in all the pieces for the armrests. I think this might actually be the first time I've used this rotor table on the channel. It's kind of a new addition to the shop, and I say kind of because I've had it for like 6 months now, but I only recently took the time to get it properly set up. However, I'm glad I did because it's something I'm really excited to explore. There are so many cool things you can do with rotor bits, all sorts of interlocking components and flush trim options. I think this table is going to get a lot of use in the future. One thing to note though is that the router is quietly one of the most dangerous tools in the shop. There are very few safeties on it, and one of these bits would have no problem cutting through my hand just as quickly as it's cutting through this wood. Okay, moment of truth time. Let's see how this all fits together. This one goes in here. That's a pretty nice miter. This one's a little tight, but yeah, that goes in there good. This one on here, that's an easy fit. And lastly, this guy right here. So that's looking pretty good. I think we're ready to start gluing these guys all together. Obviously, I wasn't gonna rely on just friction alone to keep my miters together, and I think this is a great chance to explain why tongue and groove miters are so much stronger than butt joint miters. First off, by cutting the grooves, you're dramatically increasing the amount of surface area for your glue joint, but that's only a small factor here. End grain to end grain glue joints just aren't that strong. By cutting the tongue and groove, you're exposing new parts of the wood and switching to a joint that's at least partially side grain to side grain, which is a much stronger glue joint. Another challenge that I had to overcome here was that these miters were all at odd angles, and nobody makes an 80-degree corner clamp or a 100-degree corner clamp. So I made do by clamping all of my pieces to the table. I locked one off in position, slid the next one in, and pressed them firmly together. Then, while still applying pressure into the corner, I'd clamp the next piece down to the table and lock it into position. Okay, so we're gonna leave these guys to dry for a few minutes, and I can already hear you guys at home saying, Zach, what about these little sticky-outy bits here? Well, don't worry, I have a plan for that. We're gonna saw these off, and then they will very perfectly fill these gaps on the other side. This was actually a happy surprise for me that the offcuts fit so well. I was fully expecting that I was gonna have to try to cut little filler pieces for each inside corner. Thankfully, that wasn't the case. I love it when little things like this happen during a build because it just makes my life so much easier. Perfect. After all the glue had dried, I took a few minutes to give the armrests a good, thorough sanding. I paid particular attention to the glue joints, but I also sanded flush all of those inside corner filler pieces that I just put in. The glue is now dry, and that means we get to attach these armrests to the chair itself. Now, for a little while, I actually entertained the idea of making this a completely screwless chair with no fasteners whatsoever. It would just be completely held together by glue. But the more I thought about it, I didn't really trust the glue by itself to hold up outside, so I decided to incorporate some fasteners. And if you're gonna do fasteners, you may as well lean right into it and use some big beefy ones. So I'm gonna use these big headlock screws. Some of you guys might remember these from my industrial bookcase build. These are really beefy screws. I think each one's rated to like 200 pounds or something ridiculous like that, but they just look cool and industrial. So if I have to use a fastener, it may as well be a cool looking one. Personally, I think fasteners are a criminally underrated part of design. Sure, your basic wood screw doesn't look that impressive, but once you start getting into the specialty painted hardware, there are all sorts of cool options options out there. I think having exposed hardware is just another opportunity to add a little bit of flair to one of your builds. Setting all that aside though, this part of the build went really smoothly. I added some glue, I pre-drilled all of my holes, and then I locked everything in position with said fasteners. 15 minutes later, I was able to actually sit in my completed chair for the first time. Let's roll this guy up and see how he looks. All right, looks pretty good. Let's see how it sits. Oh yeah. Oh, that's nice. So there's a couple spots like here and maybe in a few other places where the wood doesn't quite line up perfectly, but that's the nice thing about working with a softwood like hemlock. I'm actually just gonna go around with the sander and sand out all of these spots. With a little bit of 80 grit sandpaper, I was able to easily sculpt and carve away at my chairs to make sure that all of my surfaces lined up nicely. I also tweaked the feet with a plane. The chairs had a slight wobble to them, but shaving a few millimeters off of the feet fixed that. And even though I did most of this before, I went back over both chairs to make sure that everything was sanded nicely and ready for the finish. That's it for sanding. Let's talk about finish. Here's another reason why I don't love the over-glorification of hard work. I've undoubtedly worked very hard on these chairs over the past few days, but if I were to take them outside as is and leave them there, within a couple of seasons they would probably look like hot garbage. Mother Nature and time do not care how hard you worked on something. So in order to protect my new creations, I'm going to do the smart thing, and I'm going to use a product from the sponsor of this part of the video, Cabot. Cabot has a whole range of exterior wood care products to help protect and enhance the looks of your decks, fences, exterior furniture, and basically just about any type of wood that lives outside. But today I'm going to be using their Australian timber oil. This is actually a pretty mild treatment and won't affect the look of the wood too much, but what it will do is help to enhance the natural characteristics of the wood grain and, most importantly, offer some long-term protection. Oh, and quick side note, depending on what market you're in, your can might look a little different. Obviously here in Canada, the can looks like this, but if you're in the US, which I know a lot of you are, then the can looks a little something like this. Same product, just different cans. Fun little fact, in the Canadian market, all labels have to be printed in both French and English, so a lot of the time companies will end up creating unique packaging just to sell to Canadians. Now that you're fully educated on all the nuances of international trade, we can talk about the application of this finish. First off, it's a much richer color than I initially expected. I'm not mad about it, I really like how it looks, but it's just something you need to be aware of if you're going to use it at home. I was also really impressed with how evenly it was able to penetrate into the hemlock. White woods are notorious for not taking stains well. They have this nasty habit of making stains look blotchy and patchy, but this was nice and even. I used a brush to apply the oil, but after doing both chairs, I think you might actually get better results by using a lint-free cloth to wipe it on instead. Brushing it on wasn't horrible, but I did have to be mindful about drips. When it came to the sections with exposed end grain like this, I really slopped on the oil. I wanted to make sure I had a lot of protection here because these end grains are going to be the potential entry points for moisture in the future. I put a lot on in the shop, but I'll probably do another layer towards the end of the summer to make sure that I have good protection going into the fall and winter. Let's leave this to dry for a little bit. I'm gonna take it home and we have one last piece of the puzzle, which I don't know, honestly, I'm not even sure I'm gonna use, but I'll show you what I'm talking about back home. I actually ended up buying some cushions for these chairs because I thought they'd be a fun little addition, and I also thought they'd be a really good segue into my last point about working smart. But here's the thing. These chairs are really comfortable even without the cushion, so I might not even use them. And now I'm left without a proper segue into this last point I wanted to make. Anyways, sometimes the smarter thing to do is to just buy something rather than build it yourself. Instead of spending multiple days in the shop learning how to sew and work with foam, which by the way is definitely something I want to do in the future, I've effectively outsourced that part of the build to a company that specializes in creating outdoor cushions. I bought each one of these cushions for like 40 or 50 bucks, which seems like a pretty good deal compared to all the time that it would take me to make something comparable. I don't want to completely discount all the fun and joy you can have while learning a new skill or trying something new, but sometimes it does make sense to just buy something. Where that line is will kind of depend on the individual, but I think it's something you should be thinking about when you're building something. Now that we've got all of that out of the way, let's get these chairs properly set up, and then I'll do some shots with the chairs having the cushions and then some where they don't have them, and you guys can tell me down in the comments which setup you like best. right, everybody, that's it for another build. And before I go, I want to leave you with one last thing to think about. The whole reason I started this YouTube channel is because I wanted to work smart. My entire life I've been working in residential construction and I love the business, but it just doesn't scale that well. No matter how hard and how smart I work, I'm still limited by the amount of hours in the day and the fact that there's only one me. There's always going to be an upward limit on how much I can get done. And that's why I love making these YouTube videos, because the amount of time it takes me to create one of them is more or less fixed, but the number of people who might potentially watch it is basically unlimited. Each additional view requires no additional input on my part, and once you can wrap your head around that, that's a really powerful concept. All right, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Big thank you to Cabot for sponsoring a portion of this video, and an especially big thank you to anybody who likes, comments, and subscribes at the end of these videos, because you guys, believe it or not, are the engine that powers the growth of this channel. So I deeply appreciate you. And on that note, I think I'm done, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.